People who left their partner the day of the wedding, what happened? My cousin's backyard shotgun wedding. She changed her mind because they got in a fight that morning. My uncle still made BBQ, and it just turned into a typical family hangout. They got married the next weekend anyway. Not a very exciting story. They're still married like 22 years and 3 kids later, though, so that's something. Story 2. We called it the non-wedding. It was a very small backyard do. And when we showed up, a relative of the groom ushered us out back and whispered that the wedding was off, but they had all this food and to help ourselves. Apparently, just that morning, the groom found out that the bride ducked the other guy at her bachelorette party, but his family said they'd already spent all the money on the party, so they'd just tell people when they arrived. It was one of the most awkward experiences of my life, because the groom just sat dejectedly in a chair while people tried to cheer him up. We ate a little out of obligation, and then got the hell out of there. Story 3. Knew someone who got married, then moved into her parents' basement. A couple of days later, her dad heard, through the floorboards, his new son-in-law abusing his daughter. He promptly kicked him out and annulled the marriage. Story 4. A colleague of my husband's texted him about a week before the wedding saying something cryptic like, "If I'm in Key West on Friday, the wedding isn't happening," so he was clearly having thoughts prior to. But social media showed that the rehearsal dinner happened the night before the wedding, and he was there, so we figured he had gotten over it. We had family in town and weren't planning to attend the wedding anyway. But my husband texted a congratulatory message later on the day of. Guy replied from Key West. He did not show for the ceremony. His excuse was that she wouldn't sign the prenup. The reality was that he was already seeing someone else. Story 5. My friend did this like 20-some years ago. She was engaged to a guy from a very well-off family. The wedding was in California, but they were living in Seattle. Very posh, very expensive, but the meal was always an idiot to her. Right at the beginning of the reception, the meal came up and said some nasty things to her in whisper, thinking she would just take it again. She lost it. Families got involved, and she ended up on a plane back to the PNW that night. Her family had already started moving her things out of the apartment that evening. Never spoke to him again. Story 6. It was my sister, and it wasn't the day of the wedding, but on the honeymoon cruise, she found his substances. All that crap. Story 7. My brother went to this engagement party. Everything was great, nothing out of the ordinary. Wedding comes around 3 months later, he shows up, and it's a totally different bride. Same groom, same date, same invite, just new bride. No explanation. Story 8. My cousin Shay did this. There was a sitting area out of the way, out of sight behind a grove of trees at the wedding venue. Her and the bridal party and photographer decided to take the stone path that led behind, and around it for some pretty photos. They all walked around the corner to the groom, getting a BJ from the best man right as he, popped off. They didn't notice the group of people standing there in shocked horror because they were a ways down. She kicked him and his family, friends out, and we still had a party afterwards. She met her now husband at the reception. He was the DJ, according to him. Sex at weddings where the person isn't the future spouse is more common than people realize. Story 9. This happened to a friend. He found out she was cheating on him and still was on the morning of the wedding. That's when he found them together in a separate room for the wedding party. Story 10. My sister-in-law called off her wedding 1.5 months out because she was going through a deep depression. It was so tough, but her fiancé understood that it wasn't because she didn't want to marry him. It's that she couldn't find any joy in life at that stage, and it was the wrong time to get married. They're still together and have 2 kids now and are very content with life. Story 11. I have a worse version of this. Had a family member get married, and they got pregnant afterwards. Seemed all good. The day of the birth, the dude decided he didn't want to be a father and left to never be seen again. Never even saw the kid. Story 12. I don't know if this counts, but 6 years ago in March, my fiancé and I decided to postpone our wedding. The weekend the wedding would have been, he left me home alone to go spend the weekend with his parents. We lived an hour away from our parents, didn't have cell service or Wi-Fi, no landline. His parents posted all over FB that they were celebrating him not getting married to me and were celebrating his new girlfriend. A friend of ours he constantly told me not to worry about. My mom screenshot all the Facebook posts, drove an hour out to where I was and said, "Hey sister, what are we going to do here?" I took a hot shower and cried. Then we packed all of my stuff up and left a letter to him on the dining room table with the ring. Later he texted me asking, "Is this what you really want?" I replied saying, "Nope, but it's what I need." Story 13. My wife's family has a story from the early 1900s in which a bride and groom had courted mostly by mail. The day of the wedding, bride got cold feet. The family was trying to figure out what to do when the bride's sister piped up and said, "I'll marry him." The groom thought about it for a few minutes and decided he was in. The wedding proceeded as if nothing had happened, and they allegedly were married 50 years and produced a big, happy family. Story 14. My friend did this. Just turned off his phone and didn't show up at the ceremony. When I asked him about it, he said, "Well, I just woke up that morning and thought to myself, nah, damn this." Story 15. Not me, but I was the best man. Incredibly weird vibes from the very religious family of the bride the whole time. My friend the groom, her family was always nice to him, but would say crap like, well, with whoever you end up marrying, to her in front of his face, even after they were engaged. She literally just never showed up. Neither did her nor her entire family, and they never RSVP'd yes. They haven't spoken a word to each other to this day. She married some dude within 6 months and lives in, drumroll please, rural Alabama. Story 16, obligatory not me, but bride's best friend decided the wedding was the perfect time to announce that bride was secretly pregnant. Problem is, groom was religious and saving himself for marriage, and bride agreed to it. They hadn't had sex before. Turns out she had been cheating for most of the relationship because of this. I believe she planned on waiting until after they had sex and telling him the child was his. Turned into a very interesting situation where groom's parents were very upset, thinking he broke his promise of abstinence to them. Bride's parents were celebrating the pregnancy. Bride and groom both had looks of absolute horror. Story 17, not the day of, but my mom's first marriage lasted 13 days. He was mentally unstable, locked her up in the apartment and beat her. She was eventually able to get his mother to rescue her and take her to a shelter. Story 18, my dad left his bride at the altar. It wasn't my mom, it was years before. From what he told me, the relationship was quite toxic and got worse during the wedding preparation. My dad apparently warned her that he was very close to calling everything off. She told him he didn't have the guts to do it. So when the civil agent asked him if he was willing to take the lady as a spouse, he said no. She, rightfully so I would say, was enraged, and her family tried to beat up my dad, who swiftly left with his best friend. They still got married a few months later on, but got divorced pretty quickly. Story 19. I don't know if this counts, but my grandma hit her first husband on their wedding day, and he passed. She was 18, it was arranged, and divorce wasn't an option, so she was like, all right, hitting it is. Story 20. Not me, but my best friend. I was set to be his best man at his wedding. While I was organizing his bachelor party, I reached out to some of our old friends to invite them, one of them who showed up we hadn't really seen in like 10 years, and asked who he was getting married to, and I told him. And he was just silent for a minute and said, bro, I literally just hooked up with her a couple weeks ago. I thought it was a joke, but he sent me a pic. Hardest damn conversation I've ever had to have, and it was only like 12 hours to the wedding. Story 21. I know of someone who left from the honeymoon. They were in Italy, and something happened. She was apparently very scared and slept with her passport hidden under the pillow so he wouldn't take it from her. That was more than 20 years ago, and she's moved on. I never did find out what had happened since then. I moved away and lost touch. Story 22. I'm related to a woman who was unfortunately left after the wedding. Dude was marrying her for citizenship or something, and just disappeared into the wind a few weeks after they got married. Story 23. I should have left the day of the wedding, but did it 40 hours later. I'll spare you the long story, but the short of it is that my ex was emotionally and physically abusive the 6 months leading up to the wedding day. We had eloped a year prior and planned a wedding party to celebrate on the 1-year anniversary. My ex got turbo wasted at the rehearsal dinner, refused to come home initially. When he did finally come home, I was having an anxiety attack, and he sneered and said, just go to the hospital then. He did a substances and went back out with his friends to a men's club. He came back at 3 a.m. and started yelling at me for almost an hour as I was in bed shaking and crying. Begging him to let me sleep, he kept ripping the covers off, telling me what a horrible person I was. I just disassociated with the day of the wedding. I was too embarrassed to call the ceremony off. The day after the wedding, he did the same thing, and Monday morning, I packed up my dog and my valuables and left. Add this bonus. My ex had hired pole dancers dressed as unicorns to perform at our wedding reception and spent about $800 on substances the previous month or so, then had the audacity to say he couldn't afford to buy me a ring. Story 24. My sister's wedding happened 2 weeks before the wedding. During his bachelor party, she flew to a different state to get closure from an ex. The groom wasn't much better, though. He disappeared during the bachelor party and was found out to be trying to hook up with girls and do substances as one last hurrah before getting married. My boyfriend at the time was part of the bachelor party, and he told me when they went back to the hotel room. To look for the groom, they found evidence of an escort and substances. The groom was skipping everywhere and getting turned down left and right, so I guess he figured he's got to get what he can. After everything was found out, my mom tried convincing my sister to still do the wedding and just get couples counseling. Obviously, that didn't go over well. My dad figured he paid for the venue and caterer. So we still had a party at the venue. We just didn't invite my sister. My BF, who is now my husband, call it the non-wedding when referencing it. So fun. They dated 4 years and were engaged for 2, so 6 years total. Less than a year later, he married a girl who he was cheating on my sister with during the entire time they were engaged. Gave the girl the same engagement ring my sister wore for 2 years. Tacky emo. My sister ended up marrying the ex she flew to a different state for. Story 25. A friend and coworker. His family are from Europe and own some estates. She is from Kentucky. Families fly in from around the world to this island estate. A week of celebrations. They get married by the family's priest in the family's church. Big reception. His family had to have spent $1 million. At the end of the reception, they fly to Spain for the first stop of honeymoon. The next morning, he goes out onto balcony and whistles to the flower man in the plaza to bring flowers up. He shouts out the room number and jumps in shower. She, not understanding, goes out and sees 3 women walking across the plaza. She thinks he's whistled at the women and given his room number. She packs her bags, storms out, and leaves him in the hotel. He comes out of the shower to find her gone, and the flower guy asking for money. He pays the guy and assumes she's getting something from front desk. He realizes a half hour later his phone is missing, and so is her luggage. He calls his brother to call his phone, and then to call her. She ignores the calls. He eventually gets her mom on the phone, and she cusses him out for whistling at the girls. He tries to explain, and the mom calls him a cheater. He never sees her again. No divorce because the marriage certificate wasn't filed. She keeps the rings, including his grandmother's diamond. She posts the pictures on her social media of her wedding. But when he got back to the US, she was moved out of the shared housing and gone. It's the craziest thing I've ever heard. They were married for less than 18 hours. They were in lawsuits over those wedding and engagement rings for 2 years. Story 26. I should have left, but didn't. He chose to not spend our wedding night with me as he cared more about doing substances with his friends and staying out until 5 a.m. I was 2 years sober at the time. So I went to bed sober and alone, not even knowing where my now husband was. I thought in the moment he just wanted to be social with people he hadn't seen in a while, but a couple of years later. And I've learned I was just never a priority to him. Divorce is hopefully being finalized soon. Story 27. Near miss story. My dad's best man tried really hard to talk him out of it. He knew the bride, apparently better than Dad did. 15 years of screaming at each other later, and 2 kids. Hi, they divorced and never spoke to each other again. Story 28. So this happened to a friend of mine. You know, the sort of friend where you really like the person but aren't that close. Basically, I was unable to make it to her wedding and just wanted to congratulate her afterwards. Long story short, her wedding party returned the night of her wedding because the groom's party, Red parents, were demanding more dowry. Both the bride and the groom were doctors. She and her family were glad they showed their true colors before the wedding. She is married now and has a cutie patootie daughter. Story 29. I knew of a girl who did this, but she didn't leave in the way you'd think. Multiple events spread throughout the day. The day of the first event, they had a gathering planned at the bride's place. The bride's younger sister needed to be picked up from school, and since no one was available, the bride herself went to pick her up. On their way back, they got into an accident and both passed away. It was painful and sucked for everyone. Story 30. I almost did this. 2 days before the wedding, as my bridesmaids were flying into town, my fiancé left his wallet at home. I'd never snooped, but opened it up. The very first thing I saw was a bright yellow letter from his former wife. It was from when he was deployed. They had a kid together, but there was zero mention of the kid in the letter. Granted, I only skimmed it, but the gist of it was that she knew he loved getting letters, so she was so great for sending him one. I was pretty upset that it was important enough for him to carry around every day. It would be a different story if it was in a drawer or a box. But to have in your wallet, on your person, all the time, it stung. Also, I would frequently write little notes about what he means to me and hide them places. So her letter being in there and none of mine was also really sucky. He's a pretty quiet person and had nothing to say when I asked him about it. I figured I could go along with the wedding weekend and then not mail in the certificate. He knocked his vows out of the park. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience at all. He even got down on one knee to my daughter and said vows to her and gave her custom-made earrings. The wedding weekend was an absolute blast and he seemed really happy to be marrying me, so I figured I could forgive him. It was a time in his life that I couldn't relate to, but that we had a wonderful blended family and could move forward. I mailed the certificate in. We will be married for 10 years this summer. There's been some bumps. Mostly that first year. But I've been very happy the last 4.5 years, and I'm so glad that we are together. Story 31. Not exactly the day of the wedding, but close. They divorced a month later. Why? The groom left his wife for a waitress from his own wedding. Story 32. We dated 4 years, were 2 weeks away from closing on a custom house together, and a month from getting married. We'd been in counseling the entire time we were together for his childhood trauma and intimacy issues. And I just finally realized in one of those sessions that this was never going to change. I thought I could hang, but he wouldn't have sex with me, tell me I was beautiful, or invest in my life. I authored a book for a college course I wrote, and he didn't even know what it was about, though I wrote it while we were together, as just one example. Anyway, it was one of the 2 best decisions I've made in my 34-year life so far to walk away from him and the house. It cost me $23,000, and it was worth every penny. Story 33. I didn't leave, but should have. My best friend and Mo asked everyone to leave the room and give us a private moment. She told me if I wanted to leave, she had her car outside, and she'd make sure I was okay afterward. I declined, and a few hours later walked down the aisle toward my dear friend, but with whom I was not in love. We were married for 4 years, had a really decent marriage, healed a lot of trauma unrelated to him. But when I finally left, It hurt him quite a lot. It was very selfish of me to marry him. I think he's much happier now, remarried to someone who seems much more suited to him. Story 34. A friend's story that has always stuck with me. It happened in the early 70s. In LA, he gave a ride to two girls hitchhiking, struck up a friendship with them, went through the whole thing of dating, and she moved in with him after a year. Planned the wedding, and his family from Detroit came. Everything is happening as planned. Both families and friends are all seated, the procession is complete, and the wedding march song starts. The church doors don't open. After some awkward moments, the door opens, and it's only her father standing there and says, "Sorry, she had to use the bathroom, it'll be a minute." After enough time, her mother goes to check on her. She's nowhere to be found, but they did find her wedding dress at their apartment. He was devastated. He said he sat there on the altar steps waiting. When he learned of the dress, he and his best man went on the honeymoon, stayed drunk the entire time. By the time he returned, all her stuff was moved out. No note, no communications, nothing, just totally split. 18 months later, she shows up at his doorstep, crying and apologizing and asking him to marry her. He said, "Closing that door in her face, without saying a word, was a great moment in my life. By that time, I didn't care and had moved on. He was such a great guy and lived a full life with quite a few massive twists like being left at the altar. He was a Navy SEAL, woke up in a body bag in Vietnam because they thought he passed. After recovery, he was home stateside and driving to his first day at a job after service. It was a stone workplace, and he would be polishing marble. In the parking lot, he just couldn't get out of the car. Went back home, and his mom said a friend had just called. His friend's band had just signed with Motown, and they wanted him to join them in LA. He was a backup and harmony singer for Rare Earth. He was a good friend. We had fun and did some business together. I still miss him." Story 35. I was bartender at a wedding. Groom got crazy hammered. Even after I cut him off, he kept drinking other people's drinks. Later that night, he made out with an also drunk bridesmaid. Pretty much right in front of the bride. She slapped him hard and stormed out. It was trashy as duck, and I loved it. Story 36. In my country town, a guy I knew was to be best man at a wedding. On the wedding morning, Lyndon went out to the farm where the groom was working. The groom sat down and started eating his packed lunch. Lyndon said to him, "You haven't got time to be eating. We have to get ready for the wedding," the guy said. "I'm not getting married. I never asked her to marry me. She arranged it all, told me the date and to get a suit ready." The woman turned up to the church and had her car keep driving around the streets while waiting for the groom to arrive. This was in the 80s, before mobile phones. I don't know how she found out he wasn't coming. Everyone in town knew about it before nightfall. Story 37. Boy, do I have a story. My good friend had a wedding. She and her boyfriend had been together for about 9 years, but their relationship was mostly a matter of convenience. They didn't really have anything in common. The day of, she was panicking, saying how she didn't want to go through with this. Everyone told her it was just being nervous for the big day, so they had the wedding. Everything seemed normal. But pretty much the day after, she realized she did not want to be with him anymore, so they never mailed their marriage documentation and figured they never got married. A couple months later, he moves out. They part ways. A year or so goes by. The boyfriend gets a new girlfriend and they want to get married. My friend then gets a text from him saying, "Hey," so it turns out someone else, the marriage officiant maybe, mailed their documentation and they are in fact married. This happened in 2019, and she just last month is now technically divorced from him, which is hilarious because she's been dating someone for 2 years now and is pregnant with his kid. So I always joke about her getting knocked up by someone who isn't her, legally, husband. Story 38. My husband's mom was left at the altar 3 times by the man he thought was his father. The second time it happened, she went to her ex-husband for a night, then went back to the man who left her at the altar and decided to give him a second chance. When my husband was born, she didn't tell anyone that his father could be someone else. Guess what we found out from DNA testing 30 years later? Anyway, back to the main question. The third time she was left at the altar, she broke up with him, and he kicked her and the kids out of the house he had bought from her dad, the one that her dad had built with his own hands. My husband, his sister, and their mom were very poor for a few years, but my meal always made sure they had enough to eat, even if she went hungry. My husband didn't see his dad very often after that, and he actually was shocked we invited him to our wedding. They talk on the phone once a year or so now. He's a free spirit who can't be tied down to people, and he truly seems like someone who can't empathize with people. He cut off his whole family, and when we visited him for the first time, he left for over 9 hours to go on a mountain bike ride the first day we got there and was very impatient with our young son. So my husband was actually glad that this wasn't his biological father in the end. Now, my Mile has the best husband for her, a very sweet guy who is over the moon, in love with her. She was left at the altar by the man who threw away the boy he thought was his own flesh and blood and continued to break my Meal's heart until she finally had the strength to leave him. I'm convinced people who leave someone at the altar have no heart or consideration, as that is truly the most dramatic and embarrassing and heartbreaking, not to mention expensive. way of breaking someone's heart, declaring in front of all their friends and relatives that you don't think they are good enough after all. There are so many opportunities before the wedding itself to call it off. There is no reason to get around someone like that. Story 39. A friend of mine very much believes in signs from heaven. She went to church a week or so before the wedding to pray for a good, strong marriage. As she was praying, the church got darker because a cloud passed over the sun, so less light came through the windows. She saw it as a sign and called off the wedding and cut off the guy after telling him it was over. Everyone on her side was supportive of her choice, but laughed at the reason. Within a year, it comes out that he was hiding a gambling addiction and loads of debt. He forged her name on some fake loan contracts saying she owed him and tried to collect from her family saying her debt is their debt after she would not give him the time of day. Story 40? Unfortunately, the one I know of was the day after the wedding. Huge, beautiful wedding, 250 guests, mid-20s college sweethearts. Parents were in the same social circle in their southern town. They were religious, so a big deal was made that they waited. On their honeymoon flight the next day, the groom turned to the bride, my older cousin, and said this was a mistake, then completely shut down and didn't talk to her. They landed in Tahiti. She flew back on the next flight home. And the story goes he stayed in their honeymoon suite and get sex a bunch of different women. I did not verify this personally. You know how family rumors go around. Then a month later, he came crawling back, but she was too humiliated. Had spent the last month returning wedding gifts and writing thank you notes and dealing with the fallout while he partied. He wasn't ready, felt pressured, that sort of thing. They got an annulment, and now apparently it's super awkward at alumni events. She's now married with 3 beautiful kids, so I guess he made room for the right person in her life. You never know what goes on behind closed doors. What looks perfect from the outside can be totally different for the people in the relationship. Story 41. Not the day of, but a couple of days after, 2 days after my wedding, when all the wedding guests went home, my partner went Mia. Couldn't locate him for a solid 24 hours. Come to find out, he did an all-night ayahuasca ceremony with his yoga instructor that he was also ducking. He walked in the door after being missing all day and said, "I don't love you anymore." That same day, I also found boxes of her stuff in our garage. He was already planning on moving her into our house. Why he let me go through with the wedding, I'll never know. It was really hard on me and my family, who flew out for the wedding. They got married a couple of months later. It had been going on for a while. They're divorced now, so there's that. Story 42. Someone I know found out during the honeymoon that her new husband had been cheating on her with the maid of honor for months. It started because they all lived together as the girls were best friends. Story 43. Sort of related. My sister is bossy, boorish, and super domineering. She was going to marry a very quiet, sort of docile military guy. His only ask for the wedding was that she get her tramp stamp with her ex name removed before the wedding. She was clearly playing a game of chicken with him by putting it off and putting it off. I was sure she was just going to railroad his wishes, but then I learned he'd fully left his previous fiancée at the altar. My sister knew this. At a family dinner the night before the wedding, he just said, "Well, you only have like 16 hours left to get that tattoo removed," and promptly changed the subject. Not going to lie, it was really fun to see her walking down the aisle with all that lace scratching against her freshly lasered backside. Story 44. Not the day of, but a girl I worked with got married in a big church wedding, and they left for their honeymoon in Hawaii. He beat one night. She got away and called her dad, who immediately got on the first flight to Hawaii, got her safely home, and she got an annulment. Story 45. 14 years together, 14 days married. She fell in love with a coworker and wanted to explore her. We started dating too soon. We were happy and enjoyed it a lot while it lasted. She looks happy now too. Still miss her though. Story 46. Wasn't day of, but close enough that the church and priest had been picked. Venue for the reception had been picked, and all of the printing, invitations, etc., was done. Finally had a talk with myself and decided, nope, I'm out. I was polite about everything, especially with her fam. They weren't real surprised. Called her father and told him I'd pay for the printing, told my parents, etc. One of the best decisions I've ever made. Story 47. I remember when I was a kid, I had an aunt who had been dating a guy for a few years, planned her wedding, huge thing all around. He was all right. I remember them taking me out to play family a few times, and he was nice. I don't exactly remember the details because I've been finding out new details as I've become an adult and understand more of the story when my family talks about it, but I remember having a suit ready to go, doing the rehearsal, going to the church and all. So this must have happened just a few days before the actual wedding day, if not the day before. My aunt decided to call off the wedding because I think she had never met the guy's mother, and up to the week before the big day, she had not been able to meet her. I think because the mother-in-law wasn't fond of her and tried really hard to avoid her, despite never meeting her before. I think it was one of those cases of the psychotic mother who thinks no one is good enough for her son and will make the girl's life a living hell. So her way of doing that was making my aunt feel dismissed and not worth her time. So my aunt said she was not going to get married, unless she had met her mother-in-law first and made peace with her or something. The wedding didn't happen, and they lost basically all the money from the hotel and party. And the food couldn't be canceled anymore. So I vividly remember having tons of food delivered to my aunt's home and my family, splitting the huge pans into containers so we could all take home. I also remember having flowers absolutely everywhere for a few weeks, because all my family had to split that as well. They ended up getting married later on. Must have been a few months maybe. No idea what happened with the mother-in-law, but I think they made peace, albeit without a huge wedding as previously planned at my aunt's home. They're still married, have a kid that's like 16, have a home, pets, and live happily. Last time I heard of any issues was like 12 years ago. I'd guess normal marriage issues. Story 48. Friends, colleagues, and anyone the couple's families knew were invited to the reception the night before, but only family was invited to the church wedding the next day. Groom was celebrating at the reception, but never showed for the actual wedding. The bride's mom was so proud of planning something unique and turning it into a 2-day event. The couple was supposed to leave on their honeymoon soon after the church wedding. Appearances were everything for the bride's family, so the humiliation stung even more. Story 49. Not quite at the altar, but close. Over 50 years ago, my mill was engaged to a wealthy man from a fairly influential family. They were both religious and made the joint decision to wait for marriage. The wedding happens in a massive church in front of hundreds of people, after which they immediately flew to Europe for their honeymoon. It was only after they reached the hotel and were alone in the room together that he told her, "I can't do this. I thought I could, but I'm not in love with you. I'm not attracted to you." And so she took a cab to the airport that same night and waited until a flight home was available. She showed up at her parents' house unexpectedly, told them she was getting an annulment, and refused to say another word about the situation for the rest of the summer. Eventually, the story came out, but she was devastated. She met the love of her life and the best man I've ever known, apart from my husband, about a year later in the pediatric hospital where she worked. Story 50. My ex bailed the day after our wedding. He blamed it on my being anxious during the wedding, which at the time I thought was cold feet, but now realize was a sign that it wasn't right because he and his family are gits. But later admitted his parents had been against our interracial relationship from the start, and he never told me. He had a mental breakdown where he got into the shower with all his clothes on and then went and sat in his parents' hotel room for many hours. Then came into our hotel room with his parents and kicked me out. My parents had paid for the hotel room. His mom tried to say that I was crazy and needed to be admitted to a mental hospital. I saw a psychiatrist in a panic the next day, and she was like, no, you're fine, but that family sounds like they need some help. I still had to move to his city to start residency 4 days later. He called me apologizing on his way back up to his city and asked to try again. Like an idiot, I agreed, and then after a couple months, he broke up with me again because he was upset that I pointed out that I had made major career sacrifices. By choosing to go to the residency program in his city over other better and more well-regarded training programs, and he thought that his career should always come first, so I shouldn't have had any regret about choosing the program in his city despite what happened. We had never agreed to that. I think he took my saying I was open to moving to another city on our first date 4 years earlier to mean I would just follow him anywhere, even though after that we had had several discussions about how we both valued our careers and would both need to make sacrifices at different points in life. He also insisted we weren't legally married and accused my family of trying to convert him. Spoiler alert, I had to go to court to get an annulment, so he was wrong about that too. Story 51. My best friend, female, married an airplane pilot. The next morning, they left for their honeymoon in Southeast Asia. When they landed in Singapore, she had an email from a woman in Colombia that was engaged to the same guy. He frequently flew to Colombia, so it made sense. The email had a lot of pictures to show as evidence. Apparently, the other woman found out because she saw the wedding pictures on social media. It was devastating. She had to disembark and pick up her luggage while crying and fighting with her husband. She called her parents, and they booked her a different hotel and a flight back for the next day. To make things worse, she found out she was pregnant 3 weeks later. So now she has to deal with this a whole for the rest of her life. Terrible situation all around. She is beyond lovely. She did not deserve what happened to her. I sometimes think about how someone's life can so easily be ruined by just picking the wrong partner, even when there are no clear red flags. Story 52. Wasn't day of, but my cousin called off her wedding when she found out she was 1, pregnant, and 2. He was a serious opioid addict and had stolen from her, her siblings, her parents, and our grandparents. He raided our grandparents' medicine cabinet at Thanksgiving, right after my grandfather had had serious surgery. They tried to make it work for the baby for a while, but unsurprisingly, it completely fell apart. Guy ended up in and out of jail for various substances, related offenses, and is now in federal prison and, unrelatedly, on the offender registry. Cousin's kid is a fantastic kid, but my cousin has terrible judgment. First time I met the guy, I got that hair on the back of your neck fear. Felt like alarm bells were going off in my spine. Story 53. Basically, my friend said something to his future wife that made her angry, something silly. While my friend was taking a bath, she left the house angry. He chased her, trying to reason with her. He didn't have time to get dressed and went out completely naked, even with soap and shampoo. Down the street, when she left in the car, my friend returned home to find out that the door was locked. And he had to call a locksmith. There he called everyone to say that the marriage was postponed. Even my friend dodged a tactical missile. 6 months later, he married another man and this woman assaulted him. For a silly fight, she was in jail and I lost contact. Story 54, not day of the wedding, but cousin called off their wedding. We just got an email about a month before the wedding that it was on pause. My cousin was going through some issue. He was later diagnosed with MS and Parkinson. But by the date the wedding was supposed to take place, his ex-fiancée had shown up as a match for me on a dating website. Story 55. My brother backed out the day before. So many red flags. He was in the military at the time, and I rarely got to see him. He and I have always been super close. So when we would get to see each other, it was like two best friends reuniting after a year apart. That trip for their wedding was the first time I met the bride-to-be. She became weirdly jealous of me, was upset he wanted to hang out with and have me tag along on their random errands leading up to the wedding in the days before. I think that was just the straw that broke the camel's back. Broke it off in the middle of the night before. A bunch of family had traveled out of state to be there. We ended up just doing local tourist things and had a good time. I don't think he has any regrets. Story 56. My sister was left the day before the wedding. He just got cold feet. She was devastated. She married a terrific guy. They have 2 wonderful kids, a beautiful home, and both kids are out on their own with lovely lives now. The other guy did literally nothing with his life. Story 57. Not our wedding, but it fits. She wanted me to go with her to a coworker's wedding with literally an hour's notice. Now, I knew the wedding was coming up because she talked about this guy from work a lot, talked about his upcoming wedding, never indicated that she wanted to go or that she was invited. I had tickets to a college football game that day. She'd known I had those tickets and plans with my brother-in-law to go see that game for weeks. Morning of the game, wedding, she says she was invited to the wedding and insists I go with her. Of course, being a rational human being, I didn't go with her and told her I wouldn't be. The next hour was her screaming at me, threatening to leave me, calling me names. After about 30 minutes of this, I started throwing her things in a box and asked for the key to the house back. I told her I'd put the boxes of her things on the doorstep. She still left for the wedding. I packed 3 boxes of her stuff and put them on the porch before leaving for the game. Her sister came to pick up her stuff the next day and informed me that my now ex-girlfriend had broken up the nuptials during the speak now or forever hold your peace bit, confessing she loved the coworker. He married the girl in the white dress instead. I can honestly say that guy is smarter than me. He knew better than to stick your junk in crazy. Story 58. A second cousin of mine, British, was a very quiet, nerdy kind of guy who wasn't very confident. He got a scholarship and went to a college in the US where he met the woman who would go on to become his wife. She was the only woman I know of he'd ever had a romantic relationship with. Her family was very religious, and her dad was some sort of pastor, and so they got engaged and married quickly. On the wedding night, she admitted to him that she was in love with her maid of honor and asked if he'd be her cover, what's the equivalent of a beard for women, because her family would disown her if they found out. She wanted a loveless show marriage, but he thought they were in genuine love and was blindsided. He annulled the wedding, and her family apparently did disown her. It was all spoken about in very hushed tones, with my mom and aunties being all very British and polite about it. As an edgy teenager at the time, I found it quite funny, but looking back, he must have been devastated. Story 59. This story is only technically fitting your story, and it didn't happen to me. It happened to someone I knew in college, and it's extremely sad. Basically, the couple were one of those couples that were pretty much always together. They were childhood friends that started dating each other in middle school and stayed together through all of high school. Shortly after graduation, though, she was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and the prognosis was only another month or 2 of life. He proposed to her rather quickly, and they held a small ceremony in the hospital. She literally left him that very day. They were not married for a full 8 hours before she passed. I met him at freshman orientation, and it had only been about a month since this had happened. He didn't tell me about it until a few weeks later. But it explained both why he was so depressed and why he was so uninterested in girls at the time. Some of the details I actually got from another guy who had gone to the same high school as them. He ended up dropping out in the first semester. The guy was just emotionally wrecked. Story 60. Happened for a wedding I went to. They met in college. Guy was accepted to Met for grad school, and they were both religious. Like I heard her reading her part of the Bible as a bedtime story religious. So the next step was for them to get married, if she was going to follow him. But her personality sucked, and he was going to have to support her. Can't remember why she didn't want to work. So he called it off the night before due to cold feet. So we were all stuck suddenly in a tiny Ohio town for the weekend. No reason, but honestly, good for him. Dude had his whole life ahead of him. so I'm glad he stood against the pressure of marrying the first girl who he thought was cute. Story 61. My brother did this. Wedding day came. Where's my bro? My other brother, who was also in the wedding party, texts me, meet me on the stairs. I meet him, he says, Matt's not coming. So I have to go back into the bridal suite where I'm not only the sister of the groom, but the maid of honor, and tell all the girls that the groom is not coming. Meltdowns commence, obviously. We ended up having a big party anyway, because a crap ton of money was already spent. My brother was long gone, on the way to Atlantic City with my third brother and a couple of his friends. I get end watch for the next 3 days. Bride wasn't so stable. Turns out, she had cheated, my brother found out, and tried to call the whole thing off days prior. But she had threatened to hit herself if he did, so this was what he went with. Bride's mom tried to sue my brother for the cost of the wedding, but stood down when she was sent evidence of the affair. Story 62. My sister and her first husband. He left her hanging at the courthouse. When she got in touch with him, he told her he didn't want to be with her. They got back together months later and finally married. They were married for about 6 years until he passed in a car accident on his way home from work. Their relationship was always toxic. Story 63. Not the day of the wedding, but soon after. A couple bought a house that needed some work. The bride, a teacher, spent her time off working on the house. One day, the realtor came by looking for the husband. Turns out the husband had never signed the papers. On the day of closing, he had a big meeting and he would come by later to sign. The realtor had been trying to track him down. It had been a couple of weeks. Bride and groom talked. He didn't want to be married. She kept the house in her name only. Annulment. She met a better guy and married him. Yes, it's weird for a person to get possession without both signatures, but it happened. Story 64. A family member was left at the altar. I didn't go to the wedding, but as my parents arrived, something seemed off. They greeted the fob, who basically said, "We don't know if there's going to be a wedding today." The groom was having cold feet. Bride was trying to talk him into going through with it. Guests waited around a couple hours until the groom finally said he wasn't going to do it. They went their separate ways. Story 65. This happened at a venue I worked at. The groom went missing between the ceremony and the reception. The bride was frantically looking for him and eventually found him in the disabled toilets, bent over the sink and getting ducked by his best man. She smashed her wine glass in his face and left. Story 66. A co-worker was left 3 days before the wedding. Her side had family members coming from overseas. They rekindled about a year later, maybe 2, and planned a wedding again. Then 7 days before the wedding, he canceled it again. Reason, he just couldn't go through with it. Story 67. Not day of, and I was the one who was left. They left 34 days before the wedding, while I was at work, and didn't talk to me for 2 weeks after they left, so I had no idea what happened. All is good though. I've been married to someone way better for me for 5 years now. I still don't know why they left though. They never told me. Story 68. I don't have a story, but thought I'd insert that Miss Manners has said that while the only acceptable excuse for missing at the last minute, a seated dinner party for 8, at which you were to be the guest of honor, is a death in the family, preferably your own. The only excuse needed for missing one's own wedding is, I didn't feel like it. She goes on to say that people might miss a good party, but they'll be spared the stories of the divorce. Story 69? Went through with it, but I should have walked away. Husband had no wedding vows. We agreed to write our own vows, and it wasn't until we were at the altar and after I said my vows. I cried talking about what his love meant to me, that he said he loved me and thought life would be fun with me. That was all. I was kind of in shock. Friends and family all had blank faces. Grandma gasped audibly when it was clear he wasn't really going to say anything. Story 70. This isn't my story, but a friend's. She was planning to get married, and her mother was on her way to the wedding when she was tragically passed in a major accident. The bride canceled the wedding, and as far as I know, she never rescheduled it with the groom. The grief from losing her mother the day before the wedding was just too overwhelming. Story 71. Not day of, but 2 weeks prior, I canceled my wedding. My ex was cheating on me with everyone under the sun, men, women, anyone interested, I guess. He said he was getting cold feet, and then one of the men he cheated with messaged me with the receipts. After I canceled, he proceeded to stalk me for over a year. I prosecuted him, and now he's too scared of prison to come near me. Story 72. I wish my cousin would have done this. He found out his future wife was getting ducked by another man. My cousin didn't want to disappoint the guests who traveled so far to be there, so he went through it. Got a marriage annulment the following week. Story 73. An ex went out to smoke a cigarette to take care of some pre-wedding nervousness. She got into her dad's car because she wanted to sit down and get out of the sun. She started the engine because she wanted air conditioning. She drove around the block a few times to air the cigarette smoke out of the car. The wedding was supposed to happen in Little Rock, Arkansas. Her dad told me that she kept driving until the car ran out of gas in Texas. I thought that was pretty amazing when I heard about it. I like her. She's a firecracker. She told me that she got stuck in the birth, school, college, marriage plan, and realized that she wanted to get the hell away from it. People that work in the wedding industry, have you ever seen a couple and immediately thought this ends in divorce? Not sure if this belongs here, since I'm really sure that they got divorced after. But anyway, I was helping out at my parents' restaurant, where a huge wedding party was hosted. I was busy serving drinks and suddenly loud yelling and screaming started right behind me. Turns out the bride had somehow found out that the groom had hooked up with her sister right before the wedding ceremony, and apparently on a few occasions before. And in her anger, she stabbed him in the chest with a dinner fork several times. We had to call an ambulance and the police. Story 2. Photographing the groom, and you see his eyes light up when a guest arrives. You look over and it's a cute woman in a short dress. He smiles, walks up to the woman, picks her up, and swings her in his arms. Best smile I captured of the groom all day. Marriage didn't last 6 months from what I've heard. Story 3. All the damn time. You know how they say 50% of weddings end in divorce? I can pretty much predetermine who that 50% are going to be with about 98% accuracy. I bake wedding cakes for a living. I own my own bakery, but have also worked in a country club kitchen doing basically the same thing plus other pastry chef duties day of weddings. I've seen them both for the tasting, design consultation, and on their wedding day. I see how they interact when they're just together, but also when under stress of the big day. I've seen everything. Lots of cheating, lots of drunks, lots of terrible mothers. Once had a mama's boy who ignored his wife when they were supposed to be having their cake tasting to cuddle their mother and hand feed her cake. His mother was not supposed to be there, and you could tell the bride was pissed. By the end of it, he had kissed his mother on the lips multiple times. Divorce. Have seen a woman and complain at everything her fiancé said. Any suggestions he had for what he liked resulted in him being called stupid. Anytime she'd open her mouth, he'd cower and flinch. Their cake actually got canceled like a month before the wedding, so we didn't get anything but the deposit even though we'd started baking it. First time I've lost out on money and I've been relieved. Story 4. I work in a hotel. I came in one night to find the wedding was already wrapped up. It was supposed to go until 1 a.m. and it was 11 p.m. because the wedding couple had a fight and she went home with mom. At another one, they had a huge rehearsal dinner fight which spilled out into the lobby. Everyone in the lobby found out that she hated his parents. She was pregnant and she had no idea who the father was, and a few other things. Half the guest list packed up and checked out the next day. They still got married. Story 5. I worked fine dining catering for over 20 years, so I've worked lots of weddings and receptions. I once heard a bride at the reception during the toasts say that she actually thought she was asking out the groom's twin brother on their first date, and that might actually be cute, except she just kept going on. How the twin was more compatible, etc. Then she ended the toast with, "Well, as nice as you are, you'll make a great first husband." I was walking past the cameraman at that time, and you can hear me on tape saying, "Did you get that? Tell me you got that." Story 6. Wedding DJ here. Had a wedding a few years ago where the groom was a total banana head. When it was his turn to make a speech, he refused to make one. When the bride's sister begged him to please make a speech, or at least just tell the bride she looks beautiful, he got up, took the mic, mumbled to her that she looks beautiful, and sat back down. When I left after the wedding was done, I was walking to my van with some gear, and I saw the bride sitting one side crying. Found out a few days later that the groom hit her 3 days before the wedding, and he tried to hit her at the wedding again when she asked him to not drink so much and pace himself. Story 7. Not actually in the industry, but I have helped out a friend with a few weddings. 2 of the weddings I could just tell they weren't going to make it. The first wedding, the bride and groom hardly talked the entire wedding. It was like they had nothing in common. And then later, the groom pretty much ducks off halfway through and went home because I quote, he was tired. So he just left his bride having to take pictures with the wedding guests on her own. He never came back that evening, so she had to greet everyone off, etc. Funny enough, about a year later, I heard they're filing for divorce. Another time was actually last summer. Just before the wedding speeches, the groom went go hang out with his friends for like half an hour, leaving the bride sitting there alone and delaying the speeches. Then right after the bride and groom cut the cake, he once again went to go hang out with his friends and abandoned his wife. So she was left alone having to mingle with all the guests, and he made no interaction with her side of the guests. He stuck with his friends the rest of the evening. His wife basically had to go and beg him to come and take more wedding pictures. At one point in the evening, he actually went for a drive with his friends for about an hour, and his wife had no idea where he was. I mean, I get wanting to mingle with your friends at your wedding, but to not even mingle with your wife's family or friends on your wedding day seems quite rude. Story 8. I don't work in the wedding industry, but I have a depressing wedding story. I have a friend who I grew up with. She was always gorgeous and incredibly popular with guys, and I always thought she was a great person. As I got older, I came to realize she was actually extremely toxic in relationships, and did better when she was single. She had been seeing a new guy for 2 months when one day I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Knowing her history, it was a massive red flag for me. I turn up to the wedding, and it's at a gorgeous little backyard type wedding. It's spring, and everything looks perfect. I greet her family, and it's like I've turned up to a funeral. not a wedding. They're all extremely solemn. And when I ask about the groom, her mother rolls her eyes and says, "This is a mistake." Wedding commences, and as the bride comes down the aisle, her face is gray and like she would rather be anywhere else. They exchange vows, while the bride does everything in her power to not touch her husband-to-be, even standing a solid meter away from him as they stand at the front. She actually cringes and looks away when he gets choked up saying how much he loves her. When the priest announces the kiss, the bride takes a slow step forward and presents her cheek for him to kiss instead of her lips. No one cheers. It's just an awkward shuffling of feet and a few scattered claps. It was the worst wedding I've ever been to. They lasted about 3 months before separating. Story 9. I work in the industry, side hobby, and I saw it before entering. Recent husband came to me, a total stranger to him, and asked what I would do if I found my fiancée ducking her dance partner 3 weeks before the wedding. I just shook my head and walked away. 2 months. Story 10. My mom's story, but one time she was helping with some small part of a wedding and shows up to the biggest hillbilly bash she's ever seen. Plastic, multicolored tablecloths on picnic tables. Half the wedding party is drunk before the wedding, and a boombox is blaring something like Lynyrd Skynyrd. Then the police show up and arrest the best man and the groom, then tries to fight the cops and is also arrested. Story 11. Was working at a hotel during a wedding weekend, and the father of the bride and the groom were caught pleasure one another by one of the staff 2 days before the wedding. We all had a bit of a giggle and assumed this was some sort of misunderstanding. There were weird ideas thrown around like, maybe there is a family tradition where they hold each other's ducks while they kiss or some crap like that. Anyway, they baren't all still in good spirits, and the wedding goes ahead. At 7:57 p.m. on the night of the wedding, I brought the bottle of champagne up to the room along with some other things we did for a wedding night. Normally before they check in, but they were already staying in that room before they got married. I was told there is nobody in the room, and the groom is downstairs, and the bride is supposed to be out getting photos or something. I knock, we had to even when we knew somebody was in there, then quickly open the door and walk straight in. The bride is bent over the chair with her wedding dress over her head, and the best man is ducking her from behind. I just left the champagne on the ground and left. One seriously ducked up family, but they all tipped well. Story 12 was at a friend's wedding once. It was at the justice of the peace, when the judge or officiant came around to, if anyone doesn't believe in the union, to speak up or forever hold your peace. A loud uh-oh came shrieking from the back. It was my friend's 2-year-old son. Everybody was joking, saying it was a sign. Less than a year later, the couple got divorced. Story 13. I perform ceremonies as an officiant and know other officiants. The worst, IMHO, are the weddings that are just a bad idea. The couple is young, inexperienced, and selfish. I mean, even courthouse weddings can last decades. But if you have a wedding that is clearly not planned out, they are often not though out as well. Weddings that are rebellious as a damn you daddy, I am 19 and marry who I want. I give about 2 years, especially if the bride and groom are out of sync with one another, or one just looks like, this was the other's idea primarily. Oddly enough, weddings with cheesy themes, Star Wars, Elvis, etc., last longer than the traditional styles. I have theories on that, but don't have enough data that's not anecdotal to back it up. But I think casual weddings where everyone is relaxed, happy, and having a good time because the wedding is about celebrating rather than ceremony will last the longest. A sense of humor helps. If both the bride and groom are relaxed and silly with one another, those last the longest. Story 14. I had a buddy who put himself through grad school playing violin at weddings. He said there were several that everybody knew it was the wrong choice. He said you could just see it in their eyes and how they walked. Story 15. I worked at a hotel in the kitchen. We did a trashy wedding where the cake was brought in from Walmart. Groom was caught making out with a bridesmaid in a conference room, and we saw the bride throw her ring into a storm drain across the street. Story 16. Heard from a friend who did calligraphy that a bride came to get wedding invites, and the usual wording of bride mom and dad and groom mom and dad invite you to the wedding of bride and groom. Bride didn't want groom's parents' names on the invite. My mate did an invite mock-up, called the couple for a check, and the groom lost it. Because groom's parents were the ones paying for most of the wedding, they didn't need any invites. Story 17. Used to serve at a lot of weddings. At one very expensive engagement party, the groom got drunk and tried to pick a fight with one of the servers. He then punched another guest and had to be walked out. Bride seemed upset, but not shocked. Story 18. I am not in the industry. I have a story anyway. When me and my wife were about to celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary, my family let me know that they had a pool. When we got married, for how long we would last. None of them had us lasting longer than a year. This year, we are going to be celebrating 19 years married together. We feel that after 2020, we are having the best time together and still best friends. The pot was never claimed. Story 19. Night before the wedding, the bride-to-be tried to sleep with me on her stag night, crying on my shoulder she wasn't ready for marriage. Even my 18-year-old hormonal brain did a big nope there. They lasted a year. Story 20. I used to drive a limo and did a few weddings. This one Saturday afternoon, I am picking up both bride and groom, best man and maid of honor. Poor groom has his arm in a full cast and immobilized with a steel rod. Turns out he had shattered IY a week earlier while riding an ATV. They all get in the car and the bride-to-be starts ragging him hardcore, telling him he is such an idiot. He has ruined the wedding. He is such a loser. She's not letting up and not letting go. Obviously, she knew about the injury, so it wasn't a surprise. She was just using it to drop F-bombs and other unwholesome words in his general direction. I pull up to the church and she and the maid of honor leap out and go into the church. The best man asks if he still wants to go through with the wedding, and the poor dumb schmuck says yes with the enthusiasm of a sleepy sloth. I just wanted to say, no, dude, don't spend the next few years with that witch idiot. But he was getting out of the car by then. I don't know how it turned out, but I am sure it wasn't good. Story 21. Worked wedding receptions. Here are some favorites. Bride started stripping on the table while the groom was outside. Bride and best man had sex in a closet. Bride lost her ring less than 3 hours after being married. Mother of the groom lit the table on fire because she didn't like the bride or her family. Groom was passed out drunk less than 30 minds into the reception. He pregame in the limo. Our bartender refused to serve him when he arrived. Groomsmen loaded him back into the limo to sleep it off, and he didn't come back that night. Story 22. I have a friend who is a wedding photographer, a rather busy and expensive one at that, so people usually book a year in advance. So she had a bride book the wedding date and pay the deposit, nothing unusual there. The bride confirmed the venue, also booked and pricey, and had the general discussions with her about the style that she wanted, etc. They had regular meetings over the following months, but the groom was never there. A bit unusual, but not unheard of. So it's now 4 weeks before the wedding, and they have the meeting to lock down all the details, but still no groom. My friend asks about him, and the bride mentions for the first time that she isn't engaged. Okay, maybe she has a long-term boyfriend and is planning a surprise wedding. No, it turns out that she doesn't have a boyfriend or any guy in mind. So in the end, no groom magically materialized, and there was no wedding. So in that case, the marriage lasted 0 minutes, and we were all sure that it wasn't going to work out. In fact, at the time, we had some running jokes about her meeting a guy on a date and asking him if he wants to go to a wedding with her next weekend. Story 23. I ran a fairly upmarket hotel and restaurant that sometimes hosted weddings. Made a rookie error and booked in a wedding for Christmas Eve. This should have been a warning sign, as it shows a pretty significant lack of consideration for friends and family, making them travel across the country on one of the most irritating days of the year, when we'd all rather be at home with family preparing for the next day. They turned up 3 hours early, and the battle axe of a bride proceeded to shout at us for not being prepared, surrounded by her incredibly embarrassed but not unsurprised family. There were various other red flags throughout the night, but the main one was when the husband got blind drunk on whiskey and asked me to go to his hotel room with him and break him in as a married man. I politely refused. Story 24? Not necessarily a divorce between the happy couple, but while working weddings one summer, I saw the best man and maid of honor walk out of the same bathroom like 10 seconds apart, so I've always wondered how that went over. Story 25. I used to work at a popular wedding venue. Bride and groom came in the day before for rehearsal, checked the decorations, and played a sweet video of the couple. Standard wedding bullcrap. Next day, bride and groom arrived, fighting the entire time until reception, where the groom proceeded to drink himself blind before speeches and had to be carried out. Didn't even get to play that video. It was the best shift ever. Gotta go home early and take home a bunch of food already paid for. Story 26. I work for a catering company. I knew they were going to get a divorce as soon as the bride started grinding on the best man when the groom was puking his guts out in the corner. Story 27. My background is in marriage and family therapy, and I work at a wedding venue now. There have been many times that I thought a couple is destined for future therapy, if not divorce, especially when I see the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, as described by Gottman. Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, or stonewalling. I also assume that things won't end well when either of the bride or groom is a big bully towards me, or the other vendors. It just makes me feel bad for the future spouse. But we don't tend to hear much from the couples once they're married, so I usually won't know how things end up down the road. Story 28. I bake wedding cakes and cookies, but this happened before I was in the business. A week before the wedding, bride was talking all about how excited she was to get married because that meant she could finally do substances. What? Groom was confused and asked for more info. Bride was like, well, they say when you do substances, you should do them with someone you trust. She planned on them doing it on their honeymoon. When he straight up said no, she threatened to call off the wedding. He said, fine, call it off. Wedding still happened, she gave in. But 3 months later, she took their daughter to a substances party at her sister's while groom was working. He found out about it, showed up at the house, everyone was passed out, and his daughter was screaming, crying on the bedroom floor. He took her and left without a word to anyone, packed his bags, and never contacted bride again. Story 29. I work catering gigs in Florida, The bride was being super mean towards the groom during dinner and the reception. Like a sarcastic, "You should have known to do that already" get tone. Our crew figured, yep, this is a short marriage. After the obligatory dances and dinner had started, the groom came up, tipped the DJ, the photographers, then came over, tipped our crew way too much, thanked us very sweetly, and said he was going to skip away and drive down to the beach a few minutes away while the party continued. He never came back. Next day, we were told by the bride's family, the sheriff found his car, the groom's body, and a gun down by the beach. Story 30. My wife has been a wedding photographer, and I've helped her out from time to time. One of the first weddings we did, I got this really trashy vibe off the bride. I couldn't quite place my finger on what specifically set it off. But if I had to guess, I would probably pin it on my extended family, many of whom could be extras in Deliverance. I just ended up with a sixth sense of these things. I told my then-girlfriend, now wife, that I don't think they're going to last very long. Sure enough, a few months later, my wife is contacted by the mother of the bride for the wedding photos. She asks why the bride didn't contact her about it, as she's tried to reach her a few times. And the mother just said she's been indisposed for a bit, and if she could just send the photos to her. I get into Google Foo mode and look up the bride, and after a bit of digging, find an arrest report for 3 days after the wedding from Florida, where the honeymooned. She was arrested for publicly assaulting her new husband while drunk and putting him in the hospital. Story 31. What's the deal with many answers talking about the bride ducking the best man? Why would the brides suddenly find the groom's brother, best friend irresistible on the wedding day? And what kind of sick people duck their friend's fiancé on the wedding day? Story 32. Many years ago, I had a side hustle doing cakes and would often get orders for wedding cakes. Long story short, the bride-to-be threw a full-fledged, stompy-footed tantrum, locking herself in my bathroom and refused to come out because the groom was unreasonably insisting on having a say in what the cake flavor was going to be. Like I'd say through the door, "Get out of my bathroom," and all I'd get was a whiny, defiant little no. Yerk, she was about 22. Story 33. I've been right a few times for sure. Photographer here. One groom was so full of himself, but did that "whatever you want, my queen" thing where he wants to be seen as this great guy. But really, he's a self-absorbed idiot. He was a chef, and damn loved telling people that. It was a quick engagement and marriage, and I got the feeling maybe too quick. The wedding and reception were to be at his parents' place, and his mom had a lot of input, as did his sister. The bride got shut down whenever she talked. On the day of the wedding, I arrived to shoot the bride getting ready. She is alone with the hair and makeup person. I initially thought that person was a friend, but she wasn't. Her bridesmaids were not there. 2 hours go by. She can't get a hold of them. The makeup person leaves. I help her put her veil on and do up her shoes. I'm feeling so bad for her, and also awkward as duck. This is supposed to be her big day, and here is basically a stranger putting her veil on and telling her she looks great. Finally, the bridesmaids come in. The maid of honor is the groom's sister. When the bride questions them, the sister says they went out for breakfast. The bride asks why they wouldn't tell her or bring her food, and they get pissy, like she's being bridezilla. Then it comes out that the groom was invited for breakfast, along with the groomsmen, and they all had started drinking. It's only 11:30 a.m. and the bridal party is half lit. The kicker? None of the bridesmaids are dressed or have their hair or makeup done. The wedding is in 30 mins. I get 0 photos of the bridesmaids. I run to shoot the groomsmen. They are doing shots. I get some great photos of them because they're drunk and all dressed up and feeling great. Wedding happens, and that part is fine. We are supposed to go to a nearby beach and trail for photos. This never happens because the groom is literally talking to every person in attendance in the longest receiving line situation I have ever seen. He keeps drinking. The meal happens and takes forever. The sun is about to set. I tell the couple I literally have 0 photos of them alone together, and we need to go. He says, yeah, after the speeches. He gets up to speak after several of his friends and his sister do 10-minute speeches, and he goes on and on and on. Most of it has nothing to do with his new bride. 30 minds into his speech and the sun is set. He finally finishes and I approach the bride. She just looks at me, defeated, and says, "You can just go home now." Groom was in the middle of a group of people, chugging a beer and laughing loudly, while his beautiful new bride sat alone, seemingly wondering what the heck she got herself into. I delivered the images and they didn't pay the remainder amount. I got a million excuses. After a month, I finally texted him and said I was going through small claims. The next day, he sent an EFT with an angry message about hounding him and giving me a bad review. I saw her 6 months later at a restaurant, and before I could ask, she told me she left him. Saw him a few months ago working at a liquor store downtown. I guess being a chef didn't work out. A friend told me they know of him, and he got fired from 3 restaurants. He ignored me while he flirted hard with this woman. I crap you not. Just before we left, he said to her, "I'm off in 5 minutes. I'll walk with you to that store. I'll tell Charlie to put that delicious cab stuff aside for you." So smooth. Good luck, lady. Story 34. Oh yeah, definitely. Ceremony is coming up, but the groom is nowhere to be found. Everyone is looking for him. We look in the groom's lounge, hangout room where the groom and groomsmen hang out. There he is banging the maid of honor. Shame, shame, shame. Story 35. I'm a photographer and I've shot 3 weddings because I hate them and they are not for me. Bless you guys who do it, but it's too much work and drama for me and not worth the money. Anyway, one of the wedding. The groom called the bride unattractive. She was stunning and used to model, was maybe a size 2, and he was cute, but generic cute. He kept taking shots of vodka with his boys and asked for a full-on photo shoot with his mom. He was definitely a mama's boy. BC mom was hovering. But you know it's bad when mom suggests that he maybe take some photos with his wife. He told me to STFU every time I redirected, so after the 3rd time that happened, and he flashed me his junk, I started packing up. When he started yelling at me, I just told him no one talks to me like that, and I'd send them a refund. I knew right then that it wouldn't last. He started crying and said he'd behave. He did, but it didn't matter because 2 weeks later the marriage was annulled. No one wanted the photos. I was paid in full for photos no one wanted. Bride's dad had paid me and tipped me well too. When I offered to refund him half anyway, he said the bride knew when the groom yelled at me and cried that it wasn't going to work, so I earned it. I guess the whole fam was trying to get them to call it off. Story 36. Yes, one of my brides was nervous and got so drunk before the ceremony that she had to be helped down the aisle. Then when the ceremony was over, instead of kissing the groom, we now pronounce you man and wife, she licked him from chin to eyeball. She fell during the recessional and knocked over a waiter carrying champagne. She couldn't be in their post-ceremony photo shoot because she kept falling. When it was time to cut the cake, we couldn't find her. Our staff went to her hotel room and found her covered in her own vomit, still in her wedding dress. She had the audacity to ask for a refund after all of this. They're divorced now. Story 37. Used to moonlight as a musician for hire in college, and did more than a few weddings. Saw many that raised an eyebrow, but the 2 that really stood out as rough. Groom was super emotional and smiling. When the bride first appeared at the church doors to walk down the aisle, and the bride was more interested in hollering at her family and friends as she made her way down the aisle. I don't think she looked at the groom once on her way down. You just saw his face drop as she got closer, and had no interest in even looking at the man she was about to marry. The other, I had heard from the wedding planner, that the bride and her bridesmaids had gone through at least 10 bottles of champagne throughout the morning, and all were ridiculously drunk, and to keep playing no matter what happens. Well, 2 of the 3 bridesmaids fell and had trouble getting up on the way down the aisle. The bride and the maid of honor made it down the aisle, but had great difficulty. The groom basically was holding the bride up for the entirety of the ceremony, and she very loudly refused a chair. Also, the flower girl looked a little green around the gills and threw up into her basket during the vows. I guess she was either given or sneaked some champagne as well. Wedding planner said they had argued the night before over whether they were going to drink before the wedding. Groom wanted to stay sober until the reception. Bride disagreed. Ran into the planner at another wedding, and she said they had a massive fight in the limo on the way to take pictures, which the bride's side of the wedding party was in no shape to participate in, so they skipped them. Photographer ended up doing a goofy shoot with the groomsmen since they had already paid for photos. Bride and bridesmaids sat in the limo drinking more, showed up to the reception, and the bride was passed out. Groom made an apology speech to the guests and got an Uber home, alone. On a nicer note, I was playing in a church that was not air-conditioned in the middle of August, and the bride passed out from the heat. Groom caught her, laid her down super gently, ran and got a chair while someone got her some orange juice, and did the entire ceremony with her in the chair, and him on one knee next to her. Was super sweet, and she cried the entire time. Another time, someone actually did try to do the speak now or forever hold your peace, and the bride whips around, cuts the guy off, and says, for the final time, no. I never have or never will want to be with you. Shut the duck up and let me get married. Kisses her groom on the cheek and says cheerfully, now let's get married. Wasn't able to get any background details on that one, though. Story 38. I've been the DJ at a few hundred weddings. There was drama at most of them in some way. One in particular broke out into an old-school saloon-style fight like in the old Western movies. I'm pretty sure that one didn't last. Story 39. Wedding planner here. Where should I start? I have tons of stories, but this is the craziest one. I'm a destination wedding planner, so I usually plan everything by email and phone calls. I only meet the couple once they arrive to the destination about 4 days before the wedding. The day they arrived, I welcome them and let them rest. Our meeting was set for the next day. The next day comes, and I'm waiting for them at my office. Have in mind, I'm at the resort they are staying at, and I received a call from the receptionist. She is crying, and she is telling me how the groom's mom is crazy, telling me she'd lock her in her room because there was no premium wine brand in the freezer. That is definitely not included. And when the receptionist went to the room to try to calm her down, she just locked her. I was just hearing this, and the bride crying a lot comes to my office. But the groom is nowhere to be seen. She says she hated her mill and that the groom is super drunk since the day before, so she couldn't convince him to be at the meeting. I ask her if she wants to try again later, and she says no, she's super sure about it, and we checked the wedding plans together. They stated that they didn't want a rehearsal for the ceremony, so we just went to the venues to see everything. The grooms show up at my office 5 hours later for the meeting drunk, so I explained that we already had it, and he left super mad. On the wedding day, basically, the bride cried for the entire morning just talking about how much she hated her mile and how she was super crazy. I knew this after the receptionist call. The resort even though about kicking her out, but she apologized and they let her stay. Bad idea. I checked everything like I always do. I'm a little sergeant when it comes to times and planning. The time, we have everything set up and ready, and the groom is nowhere with the rest of his family and groomsmen. The bride is ready in her room with her bridesmaids, and her family is at the venue. But we cannot start without the groom. 30 minutes later, I found the groom. He was at another venue drunk and pissed because there was no setup for his wedding. I took him to the real venue and we start the ceremony. The bride was crying the entire time and she was taking distance from him. He was super drunk and still pissed. After the ceremony, he was telling me that it was my fault, that he was like that, and his mom, of course, starts screaming like a banshee at me for the same reason. She was gesticulating a lot while screaming, and when the bride approached us to calm the situation, she got hit by the mile, and the mill didn't apologize. She actually told her it was her fault for being in a bad mood and that she deserved it. Fast forward to the dinner and the groom is even drunker and the bride is nowhere to be seen. I searched for her to try to help, but nothing. I went back to the dinner. 30 minutes later, I asked the hotel staff about the bride and if someone has seen her and they tell me to go to the front desk. I go there thinking that she might be in the lobby, but no, she left. She actually left the resort on her wedding night and the next day she flew back home. The groom and his family was pissed, and somehow all of this was the resort's fault. They were mad. They asked for a refund after the bride told the groom she wanted the divorce the next day by phone, and they said all was because she didn't like the wedding. 2 months later, they are divorced, and the bride pressed charges against the mill because in the divorce hiring, she attacked her. Story 40. I'm a wedding photographer, and the first red flag was how much flipping money they were spending. They had multiple venues. One was a golf resort. Really fancy schmancy. Could have bought a really nice car with that kind of money. Down payment on an expensive home kind of money. Second, when I showed up to do the getting ready shots in their house, the husband's family was really nice to me, almost treated me like a family friend. Whenever she was brought up, his family would look at me and make a face or roll their eyes, obviously not happy with his choice of lady. It seemed implied that since they already had a kid that I guess he has to, which was kind of sad. I had half a mind to tell him that he didn't have to get married if he wasn't happy, which I may have implied very gently. Not professional, I know, but she was kind of a monster, not just the day of, but even after. In my opinion, she treated her new husband really poorly. Right after the ceremony, they were outside and she was already yelling at him about something. Just checked. And they're still married. But according to her posts, she's anti-vax. Story 41. I'm a therapist, and marriage counseling a lot of times is unfortunately divorce counseling. If your spouse talks about it, go. People wait way too long. Story 42. I've performed over 3,500 weddings. I rarely keep track of my success record, because once they say I do and pay me, that's as far as our contract goes. With that being said, there's a stark contrast between couples who are a really good match and couples who I don't see spending the rest of their lives putting up with crap. The good couples are there for each other. They are each other's rocks. Their words toward each other are kind. Their words about one another when separated are loving, understanding, and empathetic. You can tell their lives have melded so completely that when you talk to them separately before the ceremony, you sense something is missing from them. You see the completeness when they are standing together. Then there's the flip side of that coin. There's a groom who says unkind things, but only joking, like how she's always late, or how she's probably gabbing with her bridesmaids. The bride will lightly berate her groom for not doing something or for doing the right thing the wrong way. You can tell they may have been good friends and maybe even good lovers, but lifelong partners? I see so many people go off to their respective best friends after that first kiss instead of holding on to one another like life depended on it. If you spend the majority of your wedding day hanging out with your buds, I can't predict the future, but that isn't promising. Lifelong partners must be unendingly kind to one another. I see so many people get into the trap of sarcasm. It's light and joking at first, but it always escalates. Sarcasm is a weed that will destroy relationships. If you find yourself getting into sarcasm with someone you love and you want to keep them, identify it and end it immediately. Sarcasm replaces important communication, difficult talks you really need to have and settle. The best couples are the ones who are unafraid of being vulnerable with their feelings. They will tell me, almost like it's a secret, how weak and powerless they are in the face of the love they have for their so. Story 43. They are the best customers. There is a correlation between more money spent on a wedding and chance of divorce, plus the potential for repeat business. Story 44. I don't work in the industry, just have my own personal story. My boyfriend and I got invited to his, female, coworker's wedding. We used to go dancing with her while she was engaged. Her boyfriend was stationed on the East Coast. Her fiancé didn't take kindly to a male coworker showing up to the wedding that we were invited to, and I even went to her bridal shower. So the groom sent his dad to threaten my boyfriend into leaving because they work in the same industry. I have connections you'll never work in again, even though he was retired. Groom also refused to dance with the bride except for photos. And she loved to line dance, so she was crushed. All of us who cared about the bride knew her groom was just a crafty guy. They lasted a year. Story 45. A long time ago, worked as a wedding planner, caterer, depended on the client. Woman calls on Monday morning. Her fiancé had proposed the day before, Sunday, and she wanted to get married that Saturday. Story 46. The best man, brother of the bride, got drunk, became belligerent, and sucker punched the wedding planner. Cops show up, and he tried to hit them too. He got arrested and had to be hog-tied. The bride was in tears. The groom was pissed off and made no attempts to try and comfort her. Story 47. My friend's family owns a small hotel that's popular as a destination wedding location. They have a giant suite for the bride and groom that's included with cost of the wedding. At about 11 o'clock the night before the wedding, after the rehearsal, a call is made for room service. Enough food for 20 people. When it gets brought up, the door is answered by a naked woman, not the bride, and the staff delivering are asked to bring it in. When they go in, there's a huge sex going on. The bride and groom are the centerpieces, her with 3 guys and him with 3 girls, and dozens of others having sex all throughout the room. Each delivery person is given $50 and told not to tell the family about it as they wouldn't understand and it would just freak them out. Once back downstairs, the staff are talking about how the marriage will never last. 2 years later, the bride and groom are there for the wedding of their friends, where it all happens again. Turns out they are all swingers and a pre-wedding sex has become a tradition between their swinger friends. Story 48. Oh yes. Right off the bat, what should have tipped me off was that the groom's last name translated to literally junk. His bride was the definition of a bridezilla, forcing us to make accommodations on things we do as free courtesies that aren't actually paid for or at all included in the package she got. She got it in the end, but not before she made my life hell for a week while I was temping in the office. For her tasting, we had her tables set up in our ballroom along with the tables of 4 other couples, all coming in at different times. My sister was her coordinator. I was the butler on staff that day. This woman stole some flowers off another couple's table, then got mad when I took them from her table and put them back. Then she and her husband started running their mouth to their coordinator, who they loved and didn't know was my sister, about how I tried to tell them no and enforce company policy. How dare I do my job? My sister clapped them back by calling me over and introducing me as her baby sister. They immediately stammered out an apology. From there, it was mostly smooth sailing for me. But the reason we knew they were headed for a divorce was that the bride got wasted at her tasting because it's free and I want to know everything on your bar's menu. Within an hour, the trips to the bathroom started. Each time she went, the groom would not just flirt, but aggressively hit on every woman in the ballroom. Day of the wedding comes around. The groom got into a fight with a groomsman that shattered one of our glass doors that led into the courtyard. The bride got drunk and spent most of the night crying in the bathroom. The groom ended up hooking up with a bridesmaid in the limo where he was caught by his mother, which apparently is what started the fight with his groomsman. It was a crap show. They didn't even last the full honeymoon. The bride and her mother came back 3 days later, demanding a refund because they were getting the marriage annulled. Story 49. I never worked in the industry, but I was a best man in a wedding that was never meant to be. Best friend begins a tawdry relationship with the girlfriend of another guy. I tell him to cool it and let her break up so that maybe they can start off on right foot. Needless to say, that never happened. When he asked me to be his best man, I told him I didn't think either of them was ready. Nevertheless, I relented and agreed. By the day of the wedding, I was sure they were both in for a rude awakening. The groom seemed to sense it himself. I told the groom, here are the keys to my car, and here is $300, go somewhere and just get away now. He didn't, and it ended 6 years later with cheating and 2 kids who would never understand. 15 years later, I hooked him up with a genuine person who he has been married to for 15 years or so. I was his best man again, and I told him if he left this one, he was the fool. Story 50. I worked weddings as a server for about a year and saw a ton of different things. But one stands out specifically. This venue was on a golf course, and in the middle of the reception, all of the groomsmen and the groom got drunk and decided it was a good idea to go swimming in one of the ponds in their tuxes. The bride was standing on the back porch screaming at them, asking him how he could be such a dumbass, and lamenting loud enough for the world to hear that she married him. I didn't see the bride for the rest of the reception after that. Pretty sure that marriage ended pretty quickly. Story 51. I paid my way through university as a wedding musician. What follows is the partial tale of the wedding that broke me. I have never done another. The mother of the groom had insisted on singing a solo as it was her day too. She had chosen Maria and I was to accompany her on piano. This is not a song I would recommend for an inexperienced vocalist, as it requires decent breath control and dynamic vocal range. This woman had been told her whole life that she sang like an angel and was a frequent performer at the local karaoke evenings. The first time we were able to get together to practice was 2 days before the wedding. Within a minute, my alarm bells were going off. Her son was there as moral support and had left the fiancé in the car. When the mother started singing, it was immediately obvious that not only had she never sung Ave Maria before, she had never actually sung any song ever. To put it bluntly, she could not sing. She insisted that the arrangement simply wasn't in her vocal range. I lowered it to a register she thought she could handle, but it was a very difficult key for me to play. And it took me a minute to adjust, so she started screaming at me about being unprofessional and burst into hysterical sobs, to the point the son had to catch her as she went into an exaggerated swoon. When I suggested a different song, she screamed at me that as an accompanist I was supposed to make her sound good, declared the day was ruined, and ran out of the church. The next day, she agreed to return and try again. But this was the day of the main rehearsal. Any music practice typically does not take place during this time, as the logistics of moving a wedding party through the motions is quite complicated and can take time to get right. This woman took the entire time slot trying to learn how to sing. The son spent the time trying to inflate her ego and telling her how lovely she sounded. The fiancé, meanwhile, sat silently in the back. Finally, I could tell everyone was getting frustrated, so I stepped out of my strictly designated role as accompanist to try to give her some on-the-spot voice lessons. In the process, I demonstrated by singing the opening phrase. The woman literally stomped her foot like a toddler and screamed at me for trying to upstage her and steal her solo. The son handled it by telling her how much better than me she sounded and how much of an idiot I was for trying to show her up. I'm paraphrasing here. I would never let anyone get away with calling me an idiot for any amount of money. The actual wedding rehearsal never happened, and she never got all the way through the song. The day of the wedding, 10 minutes before the appointed start of the ceremony, she interrupts me as I'm performing the filler music, while guests are arriving but before anything is started. She tries to insist I go into a back room and practice with her. I decline as politely as I am able, indicating the people that are coming in. She storms off in a huff, and the groom runs after her. He spends so long soothing her, the ceremony starts 40 minutes late. When her time finally comes, she refuses to go up to sing, causing a huge scene and flying off the handle about how everyone just wants to see her fail, and that the bride would just love that. She stormed out a final time, so I just played the instrumental, although I was very tempted to sing it as a final foo to the mother. I heard through the gvine that the bride never actually moved in with her new husband, and the marriage was annulled some short time later. Story 52. I worked in a rough-as-hell hotel bar in Rotherham, and loved working the weddings. 2 stand out, which will definitely end in divorce. 1. The groom was obviously from a more well-off, snobby family, and his wife's family was a bit rough around the edges. He seemed like an all-right bloke. None of his family turned up to the wedding. Literally none. His speech was a bit sad, thanking the people that bothered to turn up, etc. 2. Buckle up for this. A couple who both had adult kids from different partners getting married. I served the groom's son, then the bride's daughter, who began arguing at the bar. The bride's daughter offered the groom's son a fight outside, to which he accepted, and leathered her, so she called her male mates to come around and beat him up. They were met by the bride, who was furious her daughter had called up lads to crash the wedding, so she grabbed a bottle and glassed a guy. Amazing. Story 53. I don't work in the wedding industry, but last fall, a friend of my husband's got married. It was a private ceremony due to COVID, but they posted a video of it on Facebook afterwards. In the video, the bride does her walk up to the altar. It was outdoors, holds up her finger as if to say just a second, and pulls out her cell phone. There's like a solid minute of her texting someone while her poor groom just awkwardly stands there before she finally allows the ceremony to proceed. Super cringy. Story 54. I've met a band leader that played at my wedding. Turned out, after 15 years, he was English teacher of my son. I was surprised he remembered me. He said that he remembers all couples that he bet they'll make it. Story 55. Not me. But my little brother did catering for a bit after he graduated college. He told me a few stories. Groom drank 10 beers during dinner, proceeded to projectile vomit on the wedding cake. Bride's mother overheard groom talking about his high school wrestling career, tried to drag bride out of the venue yelling about, "I told you to find a gentleman?" Bride and groom got into a fistfight before dinner because bride had ordered lilacs instead of roses for the tables out of personal preference. Story 56. Not in the industry. Friend and his now ex-wife got married and had a kid to fix their relationship. Their words, not mine. All wedding guests knew that, and they joked about it whole day. Divorced shortly after their daughter turned 1. Story 57. I'm a DJ and do 20 weddings each year. Bride booked me for a wedding. Canceled because she said they weren't getting married anymore and wanted her deposit back. I explained the deposit was non-refundable, but she could apply it toward any future event, either for her or someone else. She contacted me 4-ish months later wanting to book me for her wedding again to someone else. Another one, the groom was wasted before the end of dinner. When the dancing started, he started grinding on his best man as a joke. Then one of the groomsmen, then his own aunt, then a bridesmaid who looked very uncomfortable. The bride had already been pissed at him the whole night and lost her crap when she saw him do that. She started screaming at him, then grabbed his sleeve and pulled him outside. I didn't see them for most of the night. We skipped the first dance, cake cutting, etc. But the bride resurfaced to throw the bouquet. She started drinking and turning up with her friends. But I didn't see the groom for the rest of the reception. I eventually saw him outside when I went to load up my equipment. He was angrily talking to his dad and someone else. The odds weren't looking too good for them. Story 58. I played in a wedding band for several years. A wedding we played was being held at a farm, and we were provided a green room, space to change, which was one of 2 small rooms built into the side of a barn. After the first set was finished, we, and a few of the guests, all head back to this barn to hang out. Once we're inside, we can clearly hear 2 people having sex in the other barn room. We all think it's funny and start making all sorts of noise to let the couple know that we're there. The sex noises stop immediately, but nothing else happens for a while, and we all think it's just an embarrassed couple sorting themselves out and bracing for the walk of shame. 20 minutes goes by, and still nothing. So one of the guests knocks on the door to ask if everything is all right. The door opens, and the best man, who is married, appears and literally bolts out of the barn as fast as he can with his jacket over his head to try and hide his face. Then a few seconds later, the bride walks out and starts crying her eyes out. Turns out they'd been sleeping together behind the groom's back for quite a while. The groom got wind of it. There was a lot of shouting, and then not sure what happened afterwards. We just packed down and got out of there. Then, strangely, a few years later, we got an inquiry from the bride and best man to play their wedding at the same venue. Story 59. So there's stats about how high-cost weddings are more likely to end in divorce and all. I worked at a florist, and the typical wedding suite was just bride's bouquet, bridesmaid flowers, boutonnieres for the guys. A few arrangements. We were not a cheap place to get flowers, and our designer was amazing with a well-deserved reputation. So even basic wedding suites were pretty pricey. Well, sometimes people would come through and have this huge spray for the altar. Enormous pillar arrangements for the sides, flowers on the end of each row of seats, flowers for the cake, flowers for the reception tables, so on and so on. Even the smaller weddings were furnished, tended to be expensive affairs. So those big old weddings were freaking opulent. It was bad form to joke about or anything, but I always had a little teasing. Oof, these people are doomed with those expensive wedding stats in the back of my mind. One day, one of those over-the-top opulent weddings was for a pair of 18-year-olds. Another high divorce rate kind of sitch. The wedding was all freaking out. We're talking they had design consultants select the tone of muted pastel for each bridesmaid's dress, and they looked kind of like Greek muses. Flowers in the hair, flowers everywhere we could stick them. Everyone involved looked like a model. The photos from this thing were absolutely stunning. The colors so well done, it looked like it had a dang filter on. But yeah, in most weddings I went to during the setup stage, the bride isn't dressed yet and is running around possibly bridezillaing or whatever. And the groom is sometimes there too. Usually it's all sappy, excited couple stuff, sometimes a little snapping back and forth. But these two barely talked to each other and seemed really standoffish. Like, yeah, weddings are stressful, but their behavior was definitely atypical for what I usually saw. Just the contrast of the decadence and beauty of everything. And the pair themselves, having the least chemistry I've ever seen in a couple while I was working, they had a lot of stat disadvantages with the high-cost wedding and young age. And when I saw how they behaved, I just kind of went crap. Yeah, this isn't going to last. Save the pictures. Story 60. I was working as a cook at a golf course, and at one of the weddings we catered, the bride got incredibly drunk and kept sitting in the laps of all the male guests and flirting with them pretty heavily. I think she made out with one of them too, Irk. Her new husband just sat at the head table by himself, looking more and more like a guy who made a $30,000 mistake.